Sonny's Blues, Day 2. Alright, if you could open up your stories to about on page 41. You know, Sonny and his brother had a big conversation, and Sonny talked about, you know, how he wanted to be a jazz musician. I think for a lot of people your age, when you think about jazz, you think of kind of old people's music and kind of safe and square, but at the time, jazz was really very controversial music. You know, prior to that, most music was, you know, written out in sheet music and followed along, and people were played very closely to what was written on the page. Jazz, if you've ever heard it, is very much about improvisation. It requires you to know your instrument really, really well to be able to just kind of play along with whatever music you're playing with, whatever the backing band plays. And you know, the scene where Sonny's practicing at Isabel's mother's house over and over and over and over, and he'd just play a phrase and he would play it over and improvise various phrasings of it and various ways to play it. And I think they describe it as not even really living with a person, but more of living with sound. To be able to play jazz, you got to know your instrument really, really well. And you know, there were some other controversial things about it. In addition to just the improvisational element, it was also pretty strongly associated with drug use, as Sonny shows, unfortunately. And that's kind of the way a lot of popular music is. A lot of kind of the edgy music. Unfortunately, a lot of good artists and musicians tend to be rather troubled people, like Sonny is, and sometimes end up making some wrong choices in terms of chemical and substance abuse. On page 41, all of a sudden the narrator gets it, and he understands what's going on with Sonny. And it really took something bad happening to him for him to really understand it. And on page 41, we get that story. I read about Sonny's trouble in the spring. Little Grace died in the fall. She was a beautiful little girl, but she only lived a little over 2 years. She died of polio, and she suffered. She had a slight fever for a couple days, but it didn't seem like anything. We just kept her in bed. And we certainly would have called the doctor, but the fever dropped and she seemed to be all right. So we thought she was just been having a cold. Going down a little bit, I think I might have written to Sonny the very day that little Grace was buried. I was sitting in my living room, in the dark, we get more of a darkness reference there, by myself, and I suddenly thought of Sonny. My trouble made his real. If you know, I've talked to a number of your classes about the writing assignment that I'm going to have you do when we start reading the last novel, Extremely Loud. And just to kind of refresh what that's about, you're going to be writing an anonymous letter to the class. And you can write about whatever you want as long as you're saying something. So it's probably a good idea to start thinking about what you want to write about now. This is my favorite assignment that I've given in any class. And the results from this also tend to be by far the best results of any assignment that I give. People really, you know, and as long as you're careful and not reveal intentionally information about yourself or details about yourself, no one will know who you are. But the thing you'll see as you read this is how hard the lives of so many people are, and everyone has gone through painful experiences. Some people have gone through some terribly, terribly painful experiences, and sometimes it takes painful experiences in your own life to understand maybe why people act the way they do, or why people make the decisions they do. And this is kind of a realization that the narrator came to here. It took something really horrific happening to him, and which caused that level of intense pain before he could understand the pain that Sonny was going through. Shortly after that, on page 43, the narrator looks out the window just as he was about to search Sonny's room for drugs, and he sees Sonny at a revival meeting, and it's down on the street corner, and there's a couple people singing. And it says, "Not a soul under the sound of their voices was hearing the song for the first time, and not one of them had been rescued. Nor had they seen much in the way of rescue work being done around them. Neither did they especially believe in the holiness of the three sisters and the brother. They knew too much about them, knew where they lived and how. The woman with the tambourine, whose voice dominated the air, whose face was bright with joy, was divided by very little from the woman who stood watching her, a cigarette between her heavy chapped lips, her hair a cuckoo's nest, her face scarred and swollen from many beatings, and her black eyes glittering like coal. Perhaps they both knew this, which was why, when, as rarely they addressed each other as sister. As the singing filled the air, the watching, listening faces underwent a change. The eyes focusing on something within, the music seemed to soothe the poison out of them, and time seemed nearly to fall away from the sullen, belligerent, battered faces, as though they were fleeing back to their first condition while dreaming of their last. Music is really, really a powerful thing. My mom is a music therapist for a number of years, and she would work with Alzheimer's patients and also kids with autism. And she said the results she'd get from doing this were just astounding. You know, Alzheimer's patients who couldn't recognize the face of their children or their spouse. If you play music back from when they were pretty much about the age you are now, late teens to early 20s. So if you think about the music you're listening to now, and then can imagine yourself 60, 70 years from now, maybe in a nursing home, and someone plays that for you, it's going to take you right back. And she said they could recall memories, and they could recall faces, and they could recall all kinds of things. And, you know, working with autistic children, music would sometimes, through the process of working with them, music allow them to speak or to express themselves a little bit more. Music is really powerful, and all throughout this story you get example after example after example of music soothing people and providing comfort and healing that they might not be able to get in other places. And I know from my own experience that music really plays that role in my life. I turn to music a lot. I think it's a really powerful thing. And then on the next page, Sonny talks about the woman who was singing. When she was singing before, and this is on page 44, said Sonny abruptly, her voice reminded me for a minute of what heroin feels like sometimes, when it's in your veins. Makes you feel sort of warm and cool at the same time, and distant and sure. Makes you feel in control. And then he goes on to say that, well, I was downstairs before on my way here listening to that woman sing. It struck me all of a sudden how much suffering she had to go through to sing like that. It's repulsive to think you have to suffer that much. And Sonny's drug addiction made him suffer that much. And so you can see kind of the same effect that this has on Sonny as it had on the woman who was singing this way. I mean, if you've ever heard of some person singing really passionately, particularly singing a song that's sad or intense really passionately, and you can just tell that they're living something as they sing that. That was what was going on with Sonny and what was going on with the woman singing it. And he said, you know, he compares the suffering he had with this heroin addiction, and comparing what heroin felt like to what that woman had gone through. You know, and Sonny provides example after example after example of how horrific that was for him, and how he would rather kill himself than go through what he's already gone through with his heroin addiction. And, you know, but music allows him to kind of move through it, and it allows her to kind of move through it as well. Going on to the end of the reading, if you take a look at page 49, I'm just going to read a little bit more to you, and this is one of the best descriptions of music that I've ever read anywhere. Sometimes it's tough to write about another artistic medium, to write about art, or to make a song about writing, or something to that effect, but this really kind of sums it up really well. Sonny hadn't been near a piano for over a year, and he wasn't on much better terms with his life, not the life that stretched out before him now. He and the piano stammered, started one way, got scared, stopped. I don't know why my head has stopped moving on this thing. I used to be able to move my head around and move my face around, but I don't think that I'm doing that. I think that stick figure Kruger is very tired, as is non-stick figure Kruger. It's been 4 or 5 really long days. So sorry that the last video or two haven't been quite as energetic or entertaining as some. Hopefully I'm going to get a little more sleep coming up in the next couple days, and we'll be able to jazz this up a little bit more. But yeah, stick figure Kruger and non-stick figure Kruger are kind of dragging a little bit right now. Anyway, and the face I saw in Sonny I'd never seen before. Everything had been burned out of it, and at the same time things usually hidden were being burned in by the fire and the fury of the battle which was occurring in up there. Yet watching Creel's face as they neared the end of the first set, I had the feeling that something had happened, something I hadn't heard. Then they finished, there was scattered applause, and then, without an instant's warning, Creel started into something else. It was almost sardonic. It was Am I Blue? And as though he commanded, Sonny began to play. Something began to happen, and Creel let out the reins. The dry, low black man said something awful on the drums. Creel answered, and the drums talked back. Then the horn insisted, sweet and high, slightly detached perhaps, and Creel listened, commenting now and then, dry and driving, beautiful and calm and old. Then they all came together again, and Sonny was part of the family again. I could tell this from his face. He seemed to have found, right there beneath his fingers, a damn brand new piano, and he seemed he couldn't get over it. Then for a while, just being happy with Sonny, they seemed to be agreeing with him that brand new pianos certainly were gas. Creel stopped forward to remind them what they were playing with the blues. They hit something in all of them. He hit something in me, too, myself, and the music tightened and deepened. Apprehension began to beat the air. I'm going to stop there and continue in a more moving phase.